Hi, I'm Father David Bridges at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church in Grove, Oklahoma, and this is Leah the poodle. We're glad you could join us. Come on in. Welcome. It is good to see you here. It's good to see you online as well. I want to first go back to the collect of the day on page 1. And there are 2 sections toward the end of that prayer that we're going to look a little deeper at. The first one is that so we may pass through things temporal and not lose the things eternal. So the passing through things temporal, of course, indicates a journey. And we're going to talk about what that journey is and what that means. And really, what are the things eternal? We'll look at those things. But let's first of all look at the readings just for a moment. The 1 Kings reading is an interesting picture of humility. And that is to say, notice when God says, "What should I give you?" I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that I would have asked for what he did. Oh, yes, of course I would. But if you think about our weakness, our tendency to think toward ourselves, if God said, "What should I give you?" Can you imagine? Just think for a minute what you might say. Solomon says, "But you've been so good, Lord. Continue to bless your people." He's asking, now notice in the end of that first paragraph, "Give your servant an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this, your great people? Give me an understanding mind." And God says, because you've asked this, and not asked for what? Long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but you've asked for understanding to discern what is right. It's a picture of humility. And there are so many times in our journey of life that we forget that humility part. And we start thinking about what we want. I mean, after all, when things are going well, look back to a few months ago when things were going well. It was all about what we want. And then when we got shut down, it was still in many ways about what we want. So it's an interesting question of how we live that out. But humility is the picture. And I think that it is the humility that allows us to submit to what Paul's going to talk about. So we jump on to the Romans reading. Now, I believe it does take an amount of humility to submit to what the Holy Spirit is saying to us. Because a lot of times we're just so busy thinking all the great stuff that we don't listen for the other stuff. It's kind of like, well, wait a minute, I've already got it figured out, so I don't need your advice. Well, we stop learning at that point. So there is an act of humility required. And notice that because that is a weakness, what's Paul say there in Romans 8:26? The Spirit helps us in our weakness. Remember, we're talking about the things temporal. Go back to that prayer again. It is the things temporal that we don't want to get lost in. We don't want to be all caught up in. And where is our weakness? It is in the things temporal. Our weakness, since we are born in a form of separation from God, and that is to say, separation in a spirit sense, until we come to the realization that we didn't make ourselves and we didn't redeem ourselves and we don't sustain ourselves. When we come to that realization, we begin to notice these weaknesses a little more. And that's a part of the journey. Notice, we're asking in that collect, help us through this journey that we are going through. Because in our weakness, we don't know how to pray as we ought. We come back to that question. If God said, "What could I give to you?" Well, let me think. I've got a pretty good list going here. Do I get just one or several requests? I mean, that's the thing. That is our weakness, is we don't always recognize what's best for us. One of our prayers has those words, "Give us what we ask as is best for us." Because we will almost always ask for things that may not be the best for us, but it may be what we want. It may be our desire, but here's our weakness. So the Spirit intercedes. And again, we're back in verse 26. That Spirit intercedes for us, prays for us. Now look at what strength is required here. It is the strength to humble ourselves to the point of recognizing our weaknesses. Humble ourselves to the point of being able to speak with our Creator as a friend and guide and ask those questions. Because on the journey, we never stay in the same place. Many times, Marla and I have gone coast to coast. In that gold Pathfinder, what a jewel she was, because it saw both ends of the United States numerous times. And we've been to the end of the road, literally on both ends, to where the road just ends and there's a roadblock and there's the water. And I mean, did it on both ends. 3,380 miles, as I recall. One thing about that is that you never stay in one place very long. The thing about the journey is that you're going from town to town and landmark to landmark, and it may be the fuel stops or the restroom breaks or something that determines where your stops are, but you still never stay there very long. It's the whole idea of the journey. So think of the journey of life itself and combine that with the spiritual journey that we're all on in one way or another, whether we're running from it or running into it, but whichever. But we're all on a journey where we never stay in the same place for very long, and that's good. Because if we did stay in the same place, bad things can happen. Give you an example. Did you see the news where all the Boeing 737s that have been on the ground for months are now starting to have corrosion and all kinds of things, and they've got to check them out because they weren't meant to sit on the ground. They were meant to fly. The ones that have continued to fly don't have that corrosion and don't have those problems of breaking down, but there are hundreds of these things sitting still. Same thing happens to us. If we're not growing spiritually and personally and intellectually, if we're not moving forward, we begin to rust down, we corrode, we get those sticky joints. Well, that happens anyway, but we have to be moving forward. And it is the Spirit that gives that strength to move forward. And how do we know this? Let's go to that next paragraph in your bulletin, in that Romans reading. All things work together for good for those who love God. And I know that we have all encountered or are presently encountering situations that don't seem like much good. So how does that help? How do the bad things, how do those negative things help? When I was digging ditches as a young man, and my dad said, we've got to dig a ditch. It's about 300 feet long, which is almost as long as this church, and we're going to dig it with shovels. And I didn't have gloves on because I was too tough as a young man to wear gloves. Same way with hearing protection. You don't want to look dorky, right? And after a day of digging, there was that big old fluid blister right there. Well, I couldn't help it. When you're young especially, you really want to just pull that thing off. Oh, that's not a great idea, But when that grew back, it was stronger than before. Perhaps there are times, even in those times where the rub is a little difficult, speaking of life, when the rub is a little difficult, we may not want to just peel that off. We may want that to heal first, but if we do peel that off, we're actually removing something that no longer belongs so that something else can go in its place. And what went in its place in this case was thicker skin. Well, maybe a lot of people need that. They need a little thicker skin. Need to be able to peel off the layers. We've got a lot of layers to peel off as a nation because we're facing the realities and the myths of our history, and we've got to peel these layers off. It's going to be a little painful. Same way when we're going through our journey of life, there will be things that we are very comfortable with. And when those things end or cease to be comfortable, we really get upset. Because now we've got to change our pattern. And we are creatures of such habit that our patterns are important to us. And if you change our patterns, we get a little freaky. But this is a journey, remember, that we not get stuck in things temporal. We're on a journey, which means I can only look at that mountain for so long. And eventually I'm going to go up it and down the other side, and then it's going to be in the rearview mirror. And that's kind of the way life works. Be times that the road is straight and smooth and the gas is cheap and everything's working. And there are times when you're puttering along and it just keeps on dying on you. Sometimes you feel like a 1967 Chevy with 3 bald tires looking for an exit. But that's part of the journey. And if we get stuck in things temporal, we can find ourselves going, oh, woe is me. I can't take it anymore. Life's just not any fun anymore. It's just all gone. Well, we can't get stuck in things temporal. We're told to continue moving forward. Notice, Paul says, if God is for us, who is against us? So when things go wrong, I don't believe it's because God's mad. I think things just go wrong. Because we do live in a world of things temporal. Things go wrong. But it is this word. First of all, notice where we started. We're on a journey. Part of the journey is humility. Humility is being able to listen for what God may be saying or doing. Not that we're expecting to hear voices, but you'll get impressions. You'll get ideas and thoughts and impressions, and things will pop off the page or off of the TV, and you'll suddenly realize, wow, this is a moment. I am hearing something from the Spirit. And as long as it is of productive nature, then I agree, it's from the Spirit. Now we go to this really tricky gospel. Now you notice that that's not the one you're used to hearing. If you have memorized the NRSV like a lot of us have, that was a mustard seed, not a pine nut. But this is a translation called The Message. And I like it because it is very matter of fact. It's very approachable. It's an accessible reading where you really begin to understand. And look at the phases that this reading goes through. Matthew 13:31 is where it begins. So the kingdom of God is like a pine nut that a farmer plants, and even though it's kind of small, it ends up at a huge tree. What does that tell us? Small beginnings can be huge. And maybe for some of us, learning humility is a small beginning. Learning enough humility to build faith, to be a sponge, soaking up what God's trying to do in our lives. Small beginnings. So it's a growth process. Remember, it's a journey. And what about the woman who puts yeast in a lot of dough to make loaves of barley bread and then waits? Well, I think that's patience and preparation. So remember, through humility, we also learn patience, and we prepare, and then we wait. Because we know if we've prepared and done the best that we could do, we turn the rest over to God, and God takes care of it. Preparation and patience. How about the treasure hidden in a field, or the jewel merchant that finds the excellent pearl? Either one of those folks sells everything they have to buy something worth more than everything they had. See how that works? We may find places in our life, times in our life, that we just start dumping things because they don't mean anything anymore. We may start going through closets and things that we held dear once upon a time. Well, that's not that important anymore. Or maybe it has to do with some of our habits or our thoughts or our patterns, the things that we just really kind of need to get rid of so that we can get a hold of something more valuable. And again, you have patience and preparation and humility and listening for the Spirit. All of that is in play here. The one that I really like is that last paragraph, because in the NRSV it is so dark and gloomy. The good fish are picked out and put in a tub, and those unfit to eat are thrown away. And then the angels will come at the end of history, cull the bad fish, and throw them in the garbage. So there may be times, as we're listening to the Spirit, that we get that very strong impression that there's something about us or about our life or something in our thought processes or whatever. We'll find out that maybe we need to get rid of that. And so, a lot like the bad fish are picked out, you just toss it out. It's that simple. And when we toss it out, for example, anger, if we're easily overcome by anger, it's really hard to throw that out sometimes. I mean, the things that, if we carry around a lot of frustration and it becomes normal and comfortable, or if we carry a lot of anger and it becomes normal and comfortable, then we may just have to do like the fisherman and pull that out and throw it away. When we throw it away, we can't go back and bother with it. This is part of the journey. We have humility, preparation, and patience. And as we're going along that journey, we're going to come across some fish, some bad fish in us or around us that we just need to throw out and don't go back. But we have a problem with that because there's our weakness. You see, we come back to Paul in Romans. There's our weakness. We want to throw away the bad habit and then go back and look at it. Or we want to throw out, it's amazing. I remember the kids, for example, I could fix anything as far as they knew. I still can, kids. I can fix anything. But they'd bring me a broken toy and it's broke, fix it. And so I put some glue on it and it has to sit for a little while, but they can't stand it. They've got to go pick it up and play with it. And then the wheel falls off again. Why'd the wheel fall off again? Well, because you didn't wait for the glue to dry. But I want to play with it. Isn't that kind of how we are? I want to be happy right now. And whatever it takes to make me happy right now, that's just what I want. We come back to humility, preparedness, patience, sorting out our ideas, sorting out what's important and what's not important. The things temporal apparently are not really important because of the next paragraph or the next phrase in that opening collect, that we might not lose out on things eternal. And what is eternal? Life is eternal for those who believe in Jesus. Life is eternal for those who believe in Jesus. And with that in mind, if you can imagine what eternity, how long is eternity? How about that? So how long is life in the temporal form, and how long is eternity? Can you see the interesting comparison? That if we get too wrapped up in now, we might miss out on the joy that we're allowed to have right now. And that's the joy of knowing that there's an eternity awaiting. Humility, patience, preparedness, sorting out the bad fish and throwing them out and leaving them alone. Thank God for grace and the gifts that we have through that. Thanks be to God. We're so glad you could join us today. Join us anytime at standrewsgrove.org, facebook.com/St. Andrews Grove, or youtube.com/St. Andrews Grove. We look forward to seeing you again. Take care.